Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Another tricky morning in store for the Prime Minister, Theresa May. Yesterday, she was forced to reshuffle her cabinet following the resignation of Amber Rudd. Today, that cabinet is meeting for the first time, with two big issues expected to dominate. First, how to move on from the Windrush scandal, which cost the last Home Secretary her job. Second, how to deal with another big Brexit blow after last night's defeat in the House of Lords. This was the Trade Secretary, Liam Fox, reacting on Sky News this morning.
We're not staying in the customs union. We're not joining a customs union. We voted to leave the European Union, and that requires us to be outside the customs union and outside the single market. Now we have the unelected House actually trying to block the democratic will of the British people, and we had a Labour frontbench spokesman voting last night against their own party policy to have a second referendum. This is a question about whether the will of the British people will be respected or not, and it must be.
Well, let's go to our political correspondent, Lewis Goodall, who's in Downing Street watching the comings and goings, and a number of important meetings for cabinet members this week on the government's approach to Brexit.
Yes, absolutely, Adam. And it's just a reminder, I think, that despite all of the hullabaloo and the excitement that we've seen over the last 24 hours with the new Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, he went in a short time ago for his first cabinet as Home Secretary, that the big cloud, the existential problem which is hanging over everything that Theresa May does is the question of those upcoming votes in Parliament, first on the customs union, and then ultimately the big one, the whopper, the deal that takes place, assuming the vote that takes place on the deal, assuming the government gets a deal later in the autumn. And that's what that vote in the House of Lords was all about yesterday, because of course at the moment the proposition that MPs and peers have facing them, assuming the government comes back with a deal, as I say, is deal or no deal. The government says, look, you can either vote for this deal or you don't have it, and frankly we leave without a deal. And MPs and peers on the Remainer side say, well, that's just an invidious choice. Obviously they want some sort of deal. Any deal for them is better than no deal at all, the hardest of hard Brexit. So peers have decided that they want to attach an amendment onto the European Union withdrawal bill, which would effectively add a third option. You'd have deal, no deal, and actually could you just go back to Brussels and get another deal for us, please, because we don't like this one. And that's the prospect that MPs are going to have to vote on at some point in the near future. And the thing for the Conservatives is, as we heard Liam Fox there talking about the peers, the unelected House, trying to overcome the will of the British people. Well, there are a number of ways of interpreting the will of the British people. One, of course, is the referendum result, but the other is the decision that elected MPs make in the House of Commons. And the problem for the government and Liam Fox is there are plenty of Conservative MPs on his own side who really, really would like to vote for that amendment. The government says if they do that, effectively it will bind their hands, because Brussels will be in a position where they can give Britain a bad deal, knowing that Parliament will vote it down. It will be of critical, cardinal importance for Theresa May to try and ensure that that amendment is not passed in the House of Commons.
And Sajid Javid taking his seat at the cabinet table as Home Secretary for the first time. What difference in terms of the balance of the cabinet is his presence as Home Secretary in the absence of Amber Rudd going to make?
Well, it could be absolutely crucial, Adam, as far as Brexit is concerned, because, of course, now Sajid Javid will take his place on the crucial Brexit subcommittee. Really, that's where all of the big, important decisions are made with regards to Brexit. Hitherto, that committee has been extremely finely balanced. 11 members, pretty much 5 Remainers, pretty much 5 Leavers, and then Theresa May, the Prime Minister, having the casting vote. Now, of course, Sajid Javid is taking Amber Rudd's place on the Remainer side, but we know that Amber Rudd was a full-throated Remainer, the voice of liberal conservatism, the liberal Remainers within the cabinet and the Conservative Party. She represented really very much that side, David Cameron, in the EU debates itself. Sajid Javid, although technically he was a Remainer, his support for Remain was much more checkered, really, in the past. Many people think he had a pretty Eurosceptic pedigree, and in the end decided to back Remain, partly out of loyalty to George Osborne, of whom he was really a protege in Parliament, thinking that Remain would win, and he wanted to be on the winning side. He is much less of a reliable Remainer voice around that Brexit subcommittee. So I think really when we're thinking about the reaction yesterday, Remainers pretty muted, Leavers actually paradoxically, even though technically he was a Remainer, pretty happy with it.
OK, Lewis, thank you very much indeed. Well, with me is the Shadow Deputy Leader of the House of Lords and Shadow Brexit Minister, Baroness Hayter. The vote, according to the Daily Mail last night, to have this reconsideration, the House of Unelected Wreckers.
It's funny, isn't it? The whole point of the House of Lords, of course, is that it is unelected, that we're not there all the time having to look over our shoulder. Are we going to be promoted? Are we going to be deselected? Is there something at the moment that we want to get out of the Prime Minister? We are a group of people, ex-judges, well, some bishops, ex-ministers, industrialists, all sorts of people put there to offer a life's experience to what's going on, the big questions at the moment. That's our job.
And
that's
was
what we
the
did.
purpose of that vote last night by a heavy majority to actually stop Brexit happening?
Absolutely not. What it was about, and your colleague Lewis has just been saying, the Cabinet at the moment is deeply divided over the sort of Brexit deal it wants. We're going to come out, and it is a matter now of what sort of deal. And there are pressures on it, as we've heard from one side, from the arch-Brexiteers, and we're basically saying, as Mrs May promised, there would be a vote in Parliament, and we're saying that negotiations, when you've finished in Brussels, must come back to the representatives of the people, to Parliament, to see if the deal is good enough.
But some of the people who supported that vote last night do think this could be a way of stopping Brexit, don't they? They've been quite open about it, that rethinking, they think people will say it's a stupid idea and then it won't happen.
Yeah, there are some people. Those people on the whole were even more keen on the vote that got defeated, which was to have another referendum. So the people who really wanted that on the whole were supporting something else. This was much more wide. It's interesting if you look at all the ex-cabinet secretaries, all the ex-senior civil servants, a lot of lawyers, much more constitutionalists were voting for the one that won and saying, no, this is for Parliament, not for a minority government, but for Parliament to decide, is the deal you've got good enough? And that is really quite just a constitutional requirement.
But if one side can't deliver, which effectively what this vote would put the government into the position of being, that weakens its negotiating position, doesn't it?
I don't think it does. It's interesting that once Barnier, on behalf of the EU27, finishes the deal, he has to take it to his equivalent parliament, to the European Parliament, and he has to get the deal through there.
Yeah, but they're not voting to possibly change the deal or renegotiate. They'll either accept the deal or they won't.
Well, they could put a rider on it, so they could say, actually not good enough for our citizens or something like that. So they could try and affect it. But the interesting thing is, the fact that they have a deal will influence what Barnier thinks he can accept. And I think that is the strength of what we did last night, by saying that the Prime Minister has to bring back to Parliament what she negotiates. It will influence what she's prepared to accept.
Now, when you say Parliament, couldn't the Lords then just block this all again when that meaningful vote happens?
We very carefully made sure that wasn't what was going to happen. In fact, interestingly, right at the very beginning, what Mrs May said would be there'd be a vote in both houses. And I was very surprised at that. I don't believe the Lords should have a veto. And so I've always been involved, very keen that we put this into a law in a way that does not give the Lords a veto over the Commons. So the way we crafted that, and it was very carefully crafted that we did last night, if the deal wasn't acceptable, it goes back to the Commons, and it's very specific in the amendment. It goes back to the Commons, to the elected House, to decide the next step.
Now, we're also joined by Baroness Ros Altman, who, she's in North London. She was one of the Conservative rebels last night. There she is. Ros Altman, do you feel like a traitor today? I mean, you were made a Baroness by the Conservative Party. Shouldn't you follow the Conservative Party line?
I am deeply saddened to have the suggestion that somehow I'm a traitor, and I would absolutely refute that. I think those colleagues on the Conservative benches who voted for this amendment are doing what we were expected to do by our Constitution, which is to ask the elected House to think again. We're not making the decision. We don't have the power to stop Brexit or overturn the will of the people. We are simply there to say to MPs, we've looked at this legislation and we think you might need to reconsider something. It's what we did on tax credits, you know, and that was legislation that came to us from the Commons, which had been passed through the Commons, and the House of Lords looked at it and said, actually, we think you need to think again, and MPs did think again, and made a different decision. That's up to the MPs. But what I feel is so worrying is that the hard Brexiters are trying to paint people who are simply attempting to protect the national interest and do what they think is the right thing to do as some kind of traitor vilifying us for doing our job.
But you would like to stop Brexit, wouldn't you? I mean, you don't want Brexit to happen. You think it's a bad idea.
This is not about stopping Brexit. And actually, all it was saying was Parliament must be in control of whether we leave the EU and on what terms, rather than Parliament being offered a meaningless choice between a terrible deal or no deal at all, which is even more terrible. And there seemed to be overtones in the House of Lords debate yesterday from extreme Brexiters who'd want to try and railroad hard Brexit or no deal, they don't mind which, through the House of Commons without giving MPs an actual vote on whether the terms of the deal that Mrs May decides and her ministers decide they want to present is actually okay for the country. You know, this is the most monumental decision most of us will ever be involved in our lifetimes. And to suggest that a group of ministers should be able to override Parliament and offer a meaningless vote, which is take a terrible deal or don't have a deal at all, which is even more catastrophic, is not what Parliament's there for. And the British people voted to restore our parliamentary sovereignty. This bill, as it came back to us,
you say the British people voted to restore our parliamentary sovereignty.
To override it.
But I mean, Baroness Hayter, isn't this really an attempt by Parliament to get back in on the Act, having decided that the people were going to decide, that they were going to vote for leave, and now politicians are saying, well, actually, we need to decide, you know, the people voted to give us power. They didn't. They voted to leave the European Union.
Yeah, they voted to leave the European Union. That's fine. I understand that.
And they voted, not Parliament.
Yes, and Parliament decided that they should have that decision, and they took that decision. We're now in a completely different issue. We're now trying to find on what terms should we leave. Married couples sometimes divorce. Once they've taken the decision, you then have to sit down and negotiate, I'm afraid, the divorce agreement, and how you're then going to live together and how you're going to look after the kids and all of that. That's the deal we're now discussing, and that is something that Parliament, not a minority government, but Parliament should decide.
I mean, I appreciate you want to be relevant, Ros Altman, but in the end, wasn't the decision passed by the will of Parliament to the people, and now you're trying to go back on it?
The decision of the British people was that we should leave the EU. It didn't determine a direction of travel, and what this bill is all about is respecting the result of the referendum and trying to implement it in the best possible way. That was the will of the people. They are trusting Parliament to negotiate for them a good future outside the EU. They were promised lots of different things by the Leave campaign. Now, if those issues are dealt with by Parliament, that's fine. But we must make sure that it is Parliament that is in control, all the elected representatives are in control, not just one small group of ministers who come back with a deal, who perhaps don't mind crashing out with no deal, and maybe overriding the will of the majority of the Commons, who would have no say unless they have a meaningful vote.
Baroness Hayter, I just wonder where you think all this is heading, because obviously, as you say, it's a minority government. The opposition, both in the Commons and in the Lords, is very important. Where do you think we're going to be in 6 months or 9 months' time?
God, if I knew that, I'd be much richer than I am now. I do find politics very difficult at the moment. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting the government is saying, oh, we can't possibly take this back to Parliament. They're going to have to take it to the DUP and get it through them. So the idea that you don't report back and take soundings is silly. It is very difficult to know. I think that Northern Ireland is a big question that needs solving. My judgment is that we will have a better deal as a result of what we've now agreed. In other words, that it has to go through Parliament than we would have had otherwise. If we manage to move the government that far, we'll have achieved something. But I still find it very hard, I have to say, to predict. Who knows? You and I think 20 years ago, were watching the result of a great Labour victory. I think you were there.
Yeah, 21 years ago.
21 years ago on the embankment.
Indeed.
On the embankment. New dawn.
Broken.
Has it broken? Has it not? And who would have predicted where we are now? But I have to say, I find it very hard to know by the end of the year. But what I do know is that Parliament has to be involved in this. And that, I think, was something I'll be very proud of, is that vote we decided last night.
OK, thank you both very much indeed for joining us.
First today, the House of Lords defeated the government again over Brexit last night with an amendment which would give MPs the power to stop the UK leaving the EU without a deal or make Theresa May return to the negotiating table in Brussels. Well, another parliamentary setback for the government's Brexit policy. Another angry Daily Mail front page. The Mail says the House of Lords is showing itself to be a house of unelected wreckers and that the vote shows the Remain elite in cahoots with Brussels is fighting a guerrilla war against Brexit using any weapon it can. Well, there was some highly charged language on all sides during the debate. Let's take a look.
We remember the reluctance of Mrs May to allow Parliament itself to be involved. She wanted the government to be in charge. And my mind went back to Berlin in 1933, March 1933, when the enabling bill was passed in the Reichstag. And that enabling bill transferred the democratic right from the Parliament into the hands of one man, that was the Chancellor. And his name was Adolf Hitler.
This House is, of course, a cosy cabal of Remain. It is a wrecking amendment in substance. And those proposing and supporting it are playing the role of a fifth column for Monsieur Barnier and the EU negotiators. They are doing, I'm sure he's very grateful, they are doing his job for him.
Well, one of those speaking in last night's debate was former Conservative Party leader Michael Howard, and he joins us now here in the studio. Unelected wreckers in the House of Lords, cosy cabal of Remain, a fifth column. Do you agree?
Well, I don't think I quite used any of those terms, but it is true, undoubtedly, that the House of Lords is overwhelmingly for Remain. And I fear that many of the amendments which they have passed to this bill would obstruct the smooth passage of Brexit. I hope the House of Commons will stand firm and reject these amendments. And I think many of the amendments, including the one I spoke against yesterday, are thoroughly misconceived and very constitutionally dangerous. The one in particular that I spoke against would give the House of Lords a veto, effectively, on Brexit, because it provided that unless an Act of Parliament was passed by the end of January next, and of course to pass an Act of Parliament you need the approval of the House of Lords, then the matter would go back to the House of Commons and they would be charged with the negotiations, which is not what the House of Commons is about.
Layla, constitutionally dangerous, giving the House of Lords unelected peers a veto, effectively.
Well, I don't think that this is entirely unreasonable. First of all, on the customs union domain, this is the 9th defeat that we've had now in the Lords. It's interesting that it's the Lords that seems to be able to be doing the heavy lifting on this. But on things like the customs union... Well, it's interesting that, because, you know, the Daily Mail now saying, oh, unelected House of Lords, when the Liberal Democrats tried to reform the House of Lords to make it an elected chamber, it was the Tory party and indeed people like the Daily Mail who weren't that keen. So it's interesting now that that's coming back. I actually hope that's back on the table.
Are they wrecking? Are they trying to thwart Brexit?
I don't think they are. No, what they're doing is they're putting in some proper safeguards in place. We'll see if any of it's overturned. As you rightly point out, Michael, we can overturn this if we want to. I'm not sure the Commons will, though, and this is why the customs bill, for example, was pushed back into the long grass. Theresa May knew she didn't have the votes.
Right. I mean,
Well,
isn't this just the job of the House of Lords to do this?
No, it goes beyond the normal job of the House of Lords, which is to scrutinise legislation. It is introducing, if it gets its way, a series of obstacles in the way of Brexit, thwarting the will of the people. And actually, if yesterday's amendment stays as law, you'd have the House of Lords in a position of thwarting not only the will of the people, but the will of the elected chamber.
Right. I mean, is the House of Lords, our peers, putting themselves in danger in future?
I think it is possible that there will be such a backlash, and you've seen it in some of this morning's papers, against the House of Lords, because this is a very unusual situation. We've had a referendum. The people have spoken. Parliament delegated this responsibility to the people at large. They've spoken, and it's a job of Parliament to implement the will of the people and not to obstruct it.
Right, but when you say they might be in danger, what do you mean, the House of Lords? If they continue to do what they say, is the job of the whole of Parliament to judge whether the government has got a good deal on behalf of the people?
Well, it depends what you mean by that. The government have said there'll be a vote, a meaningful vote at the end of the process, and Parliament will be free to express its view. That's quite different from giving Parliament the power to send the government back to the negotiating table. That's really saying to Mr. Barnier, make sure you don't have a deal. Because then, you know, we'll be able to thwart Brexit.
That just sounds...
That's what it's tantamount to doing.
No, but that just sounds reasonable to me. So if the government, let's say, it comes back with a deal that is going to be rubbish, and then it puts it to Parliament, says, do you either want this, or do you want the cliff edge of WTO rules? That's not a meaningful vote. That's not a choice. The choice at that point should be, actually, this deal's rubbish, Parliament doesn't want it. 3.6 of our Code of Conduct says we have to act in the national interest. If Parliament decides that this deal is not in the national interest as it stands, don't you think it's reasonable for us to send it back and say to the government, you need to do better?
Now, Parliament delegated the decision on the national interest to the people of our country.
And actually
they voted in a referendum. And Mr. Barnier and the people, there are people in the European Union who don't want us to leave. So if this becomes law, all they have to do is refuse to do a deal.
And do you see them as a fifth column? Do you see them as betraying their country?
I think that in terms of Brexit, they are playing with fire. And I think they're adopting a very, very dangerous position.
All right, let's talk about immigration. Obviously, Amber Rudd resigning yesterday, and there is a new Home Secretary, Sajid Javid. It has opened up a discussion on immigration policy and the approach to it. Oliver Letwin, your colleague in the Conservative Party, said there needs to be more humanity on the issue of immigration as a whole, and that over the past 20 or 30 years in British politics have underplayed the advantages to our country of migration, so the argument has become unbalanced. Did you get it wrong on immigration, Michael?
No, I think the point is that Brexit provides us with the opportunity for having this kind of discussion. What I used to say in the Brexit debate was the Brexit referendum is not about the level of immigration. It's about who decides the level of immigration. And when Brexit happens, and we as a country once again have control over the level of immigration, over who comes in and who comes out, then that's the opportunity for having a civilised debate within our country about the level of immigration and the categories of people we should allow in.
Would you run a campaign like the one when you were leader of the Conservative Party in 2005? Are you thinking what we're thinking? It's not racist to impose limits on immigration. Would that be the sort of sentiment you'd want to see in here now?
Well, there was nothing wrong with that, and there was absolutely nothing wrong with talking about the level of immigration, which was high and probably is still high. But the whole point is that once we have the power in this country after Brexit to make these decisions for ourselves, that's the time to open up a civilised discussion on the whole issue.
And right to drop the hostile environment slogan?
Well, we're talking about words. We've got to be firm in the way we deal with illegal immigration.
All right.
What word you use, I think, is entirely a secondary matter.
Michael Howard, thank you.
Thank you very much.